Zena had once known the soft warmth of a mother's hug, the fragrant scent of stew simmering in a clay pot, the sound of lullabies sung as the stars blinked above their humble hut. But all of that faded like a dream after the sickness came. Her mother, whose laughter had once been the heartbeat of their home, grew pale and still, until the only sound left was the silence that came after the final breath. Her father, who had never quite known how to manage grief, remarried too soon. The woman he brought into their home, Lemba, was not cruel in front of others, at least not at first. She was beautiful in a cold, polished way, like a statue carved from marble. The villagers whispered their doubts, but no one dared speak openly. Zena, barely 11 when her world changed, tried to welcome her, but from the first night, Lemba made it clear, Zena was no longer a daughter in that house. She was an unwanted reminder of the past. At first, the changes were subtle. Zena's blanket was taken from her bed and given to Lemba's own daughter, Demiza, who had the round cheeks and spoiled smile of someone who had always had too much. Then Zena's chores multiplied. Before long she was the one up before sunrise, sweeping the compound, fetching water, chopping firewood and lighting the cooking fire. When it came time to eat, Lemba would serve generous portions to herself, Demiza and Zena's father, but Zena was handed only what remained, charred peels, broken bones and once, a lump of something moldy scraped from the bottom of the pot. "Eat from there," Lemba said one day, pointing to the dustbin where food scraps were thrown. "It's where you belong. Ash suits you better than light." Zena didn't cry, not in front of them. She took the dustbin in her small hands and ate what she could salvage, bits of cassava root, torn leaves, gristle with hints of meat. Her stomach twisted from the bitterness of spoiled food, but she told herself it was only for a short time. That her father would see. That he would remember the daughter who once held his hand through storms and plucked mangoes with him in the dry season. But he had grown silent, as if Lemba's spell had swallowed his tongue. At night, Zena curled up beside the ashes of the cooking fire. The warmth soothed her aching limbs and sometimes, when the wind howled through the trees, she imagined it was her mother whispering from the beyond. "Stay kind, little one," the voice would say in her dreams. "Fire may burn but it also feeds. Ashes may dirty, but they are the soul of flame." Lemba made sure Zena never forgot her place. When guests came, Zena was hidden. When food was served, she was last, if remembered at all. If she dared to sing or hum, Lemba would hiss, "Who told you beggars could sing?" But Zena kept singing to herself, quietly when no one was near, her voice barely a thread in the air. Her only joys were in cooking, oddly enough. Despite the cruelty, Lemba allowed her to prepare most meals, too lazy to cook herself. Zena handled the herbs with care, grinding spices with smooth stones, and learning how to stretch flavors even from the ugliest roots. In the ashes of burnt yam she found hidden sweetness. In wilted leaves, a bitterness that reminded her she was still alive. Sometimes she would sneak bits of seasoning from the market, trading errands for whispers of turmeric, garlic, or even wild honey. She'd hide these treasures in hollowed-out gourds buried near the ash pit, adding them to meals only when alone. With her hands stained by soot and her clothes hanging loose on her shrinking frame, Zena became something more than a girl. She was a quiet alchemist, transforming what was discarded into something almost sacred. Yet the villagers turned their eyes away. They saw Lemba at church, dressed in fine wrappers, smiling with perfect teeth. They heard her praising God and donating to the sick. They watched her daughter, Demiza, with her golden anklets and polished braids, laughing as if joy were her birthright. And they told themselves perhaps the rumors weren't true. Perhaps Zena was simply clumsy. Quiet. A little odd. There was one boy, though, Mosi, who sometimes brought her water from the well when Lemba wasn't looking. He never said much, just offered it with a soft nod. Once he left her a small wrapped ball of cooked maize with a flower tucked inside. She ate it slowly, savoring every bite. She never saw him again after that. Lemba had seen the flower and burned it in front of her, laughing. "Even rats attract fools," she said. "But don't forget, you're nothing but ash." And yet, even in ash, something inside Zena burned. A quiet resistance. A memory of her mother's laughter. A seed of warmth she refused to let go of. One evening, as the sky turned red with dusk and Zena stirred the last pot of stew, she stared into the fire and thought of everything she'd endured. Her fingers, though thin, moved with purpose. She reached into the ashes with care, lifting hot coals and moving them gently to keep the heat steady. The flames licked the bottom of the pot like tongues tasting truth. Behind her, Lemba and Demiza laughed. They were planning a trip to the palace for a festival, one that Zena, of course, would not attend. "The queen herself will be there," Lemba said. "Only people of worth are invited." not rag children like her. But the wind that night carried whispers. Zena heard them in the rustle of the leaves, in the crackle of the firewood. The same voice that had haunted her dreams spoke again, clearer now. They throw you their scraps, but you hold the flavor of stars. Remember, child, the curse is not yours. It's theirs for failing to see. She blinked, thinking it was only her imagination. But as she lifted the spoon to taste the stew, something shifted. The bitterness faded. The flavor deepened. Her body, worn and scarred, felt a sudden flicker of energy. Her heart beat with a strange rhythm, and the ashes at her feet glowed faintly, like embers kissed by something ancient. Zena didn't know it yet, but the curse placed upon her would soon become a blessing. The girl who ate from the dustbin would one day serve dishes before royalty. The girl forgotten by all would make a meal remembered for generations. For now, though, she stirred in silence. The fire warmed her face and the wind carried the scent of something rising, something magical, out of the ashes. The silence of early morning wrapped around Zena like a shawl as she crouched beside the fire pit. Her fingers moved without needing thought, reaching for dried leaves, a pinch of salt, a stolen sliver of spice tucked into the fold of her worn wrapper. No one else was awake yet. The sky was still dark, and the wind carried the damp smell of wood smoke and dew. This was her favorite time, not because it was peaceful, but because it was hers. Before the stepmother's voice could slice through the air like a whip, before Demise's mocking laughter, before her father's silence dug its claws deeper into her heart. Zena stirred the pot slowly, her left hand cradling the ladle like a newborn. Each movement was careful, rhythmic, almost musical. She murmured to the ashes beneath the flames as though they were old friends. "Don't worry," she whispered, "I know what you hide. The fire burns away what doesn't belong. But you remember everything." It had become a habit, speaking to the ashes. They were the only things that never hit her, never lied, never looked the other way. She swore sometimes they answered too, crackling in a way that felt like laughter or sighs or even a hum of approval when she got the flavors just right. Her food, even made from leftovers, always tasted better than it had any right to. She didn't know where the idea had come from, but she had begun to believe the ashes held memory. That when her mother used to cook, her songs and laughter were soaked into the firewood, and now in these ashes, a piece of her still lingered. Zena imagined the fire telling her stories in its hisses, guiding her hands as they chopped and mixed. Even when her body ached and her belly growled, the cooking gave her peace. That morning, she had found a shriveled tomato half-chewed by rodents and discarded behind the hut. Most would have tossed it, but Zena knew how to bring life back into dying things. She roasted it over the flame, grinding it with salt and onion peels into a paste. With the added heat of a chili she'd traded for a broken necklace, she turned it into a thick red sauce, bitter, fiery, and somehow comforting. As she stirred, something strange began to happen. The smoke rising from the pot grew thick, darker than usual, almost silver. The air around her stilled. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. And then she saw her. From within the smoke stepped a figure, old, bent, and cloaked in tattered cloth. Her skin was ashen, eyes like dying coals, but they sparked with knowing. She didn't walk so much as glide, her feet never fully touching the ground. Zena froze, clutching the spoon. Her heart pounded. Spirits were said to roam at dawn, and only those with cursed blood could see them. Had she gone mad? Or was this the end the stepmother had always promised her? But the old woman smiled, a crooked thing, and sat beside the fire like she'd done it 100 times. "You stir with love," the woman said, her voice like the rustle of dried leaves. "Even with scraps, you cook as if the gods themselves are watching." Zena tried to speak but found her throat dry. "I've seen many girls," the woman continued, reaching into the smoke and pulling out what looked like a charred seed. "But few who speak to ash and listen when it speaks back. You're one of them." Zena finally found her voice. "Who are you?" "A cook," the woman said with a wink. "Just like you. Once upon a time." Zena's eyes drifted to her hands, calloused, burned, too small to matter. "I'm no cook. I just make food so I don't die." "Ah," the woman chuckled, "but that's what cooking is. Feeding life into emptiness. Turning sorrow into spice. You've been doing magic without even knowing it." Zena didn't know what to say. Was this a trick? A hallucination from hunger? The old woman leaned closer, her eyes suddenly sharp. "They feed you rot and call it kindness. But you, child, you turn their rot into beauty. That's no accident. That's power." Zena stared at the embers, not daring to believe. The woman pulled something from within her cloak, a tiny charm made of twisted wire and bone. It shimmered faintly in the smoke. "Take it," she said. "This is not a gift. It's a reminder. You were born of flame and sorrow, but that doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are forged." Zena hesitated. "What does it do?" "It listens," said the woman. "When you cook with truth in your heart, it will glow. When you're in danger, it will burn. But most importantly, it will remind you, what they waste you will make golden." The charm felt warm in her hand, and when she closed her fingers around it, she felt something like a heartbeat. It was small but strong, like hope. When Zena looked up, the woman was gone. Not a trace remained, except for the silver smoke that still danced in the air. She tucked the charm beneath her wrapper near her chest. For a long time she sat by the fire in silence, unsure if what she'd seen was real. But that day, when Lemba came and snarled at the state of the kitchen, Zena didn't flinch. When Demisa threw a fruit at her and called her names, she only blinked. Because something had changed. She could feel it. That night, she cooked a simple porridge with nothing but water and crushed kernels. But when she added a sprinkle of dried ginger she had stolen weeks ago and stirred with her left hand, the charm beneath her clothes warmed again. And when she tasted it, her eyes widened. The flavor was deeper, richer. It lingered on her tongue like honey and smoke. Even she, who had eaten every version of this porridge since childhood, knew this was different. It was perfect. She couldn't explain how or why, but the pot seemed to shimmer slightly in the moonlight. The ashes beneath it glowed, soft and orange, like a sleeping fire that refused to die out. That week, the leftovers she used began to change in her hands. Bruised bananas became honeyed fritters. Crushed yams turned into smooth, creamy soups. Even the bones she'd usually throw away gave flavor to broths that seemed to heal her tired limbs. No one else noticed. Or if they did, they were too proud to say. But Zena saw the truth in the flames, heard the whispers in the smoke. Her mother's voice returned in dreams, singing gently. And the charm never left her side. "What they waste you will make golden." It became her mantra. She didn't tell anyone about the old woman. Not yet. She kept the secret close, hidden beneath the rags and the dirt and the silence. But inside, a new hunger was growing, not just for food but for something bigger. The ashes no longer made her feel dirty. They reminded her of roots, of beginnings, of what burned and survived. She began to believe that maybe she hadn't been forgotten by the spirits. Maybe she had just been waiting. And somewhere in the shadows of that smoke, a path was forming, leading far beyond dustbins and cruel stepmothers. A path that only a girl made of ash and fire could walk. The palace, once a haven of splendor and tradition, was suffocating under a heavy silence. Courtiers tiptoed through marble halls, servants wept in corners, and priests burned incense day and night, but nothing could mask the truth. The queen was dying. No one said it aloud, for fear the walls themselves might crumble, but the fear rippled through every corridor. At the center of it all, behind a thick veil of silk and cedar-scented candles, lay the queen, once vibrant, now pale and listless. Her breath came in shallow spurts, her body too weak to sit upright, her eyes dim like lamps near death. Every day, a new dish was presented by the royal cooks. Bowls of golden broth, trays of smoked meats, jellied fruits and silver dishes. None of them stayed in her stomach for more than moments. Everything was vomited out or rejected with a feeble shake of the head. The king paced like a caged lion. He who had once ruled with fire in his voice, now looked worn and gray. He watched his wife fade day by day, powerless. He'd summoned physicians from distant lands, herbalists from the mountains, even a bone reader from the southern islands. All failed. And so, with desperation louder than any decree, he stood on the royal balcony and declared to the kingdom below, "Let it be known across the land, whoever can prepare a meal that brings healing to my queen, shall be rewarded with anything they desire. Land, gold, titles, ask and it shall be granted. Save her and be forever honored." The news traveled like a wildfire. In the village where Zena lived, it arrived by drum and by whisper. The town crier stood beneath the tamarind tree and shouted the king's promise as if it were a riddle. People gathered, murmuring about the reward, their minds racing with greed and curiosity. Lemba scoffed as she stirred her morning brew. "The queen's illness isn't from food, it's a curse. A royal curse. One only the mountain gods can lift." Demisa, bored and always quick to mock, rolled her eyes. "Even if food could heal her, do you think a dirty kitchen girl like Zena could do it?" Zena, who had been quietly sweeping the floor with her charm warm against her chest, said nothing. But the words clung to her. That night, long after the household had gone to sleep, Zena sat before the fire. The ashes greeted her like old friends. She opened her pouch and spread her gathered herbs. a blend of bitter roots, dried leaves and forest salt she had once traded from a traveler. She crushed them gently, her fingers moving with intention. "What do I know of sickness?" she whispered. The smoke swirled around her and a soft breeze stirred the embers. "Everything," came the whispered reply. Zena closed her eyes. In her dreams, the old woman from the ashes returned. Only this time she stood behind a long table with bowls glowing faintly. Her voice was low but sure. "Sickness hides in the places we bury pain. It is not always of the body. Sometimes, it is hunger of the soul." "What do I cook then?" Zena asked. The old woman picked up a ladle. "Not what you think she needs. Cook what she has forgotten. Cook memory. Cook comfort. Cook warmth. Only then will the soul begin to return." Zena woke with her heart racing. That morning, she stole away before dawn with nothing but her bundle and a woven sack of ingredients. She didn't tell Lemba. She didn't look back. The king's words still echoed in her mind. "Anything you desire." But Zena wasn't thinking of riches or land. She was thinking of silence. Of how it felt to be seen. The journey to the palace took 2 days by foot. She passed carts filled with aspiring cooks, chefs in bright robes, herbalists with scrolls tucked under their arms, women carrying pots of thick, steaming stews. Many laughed at her soot-covered face, at her barefoot shuffle. But Zena paid them no mind. At the palace gates, the guards hesitated. She looked like a beggar. But the head steward, a stern woman named Ghania, had been watching the parade of useless dishes. Something in Zena's eyes caught her attention. "You," Ghania said. "You're not here to waste time, are you?" Zena shook her head. "No, madam. I'm here to cook." Ghania studied her a moment longer. Then with a shrug she opened the gate. "Follow me." The palace kitchen was chaos. Over a dozen cooks worked in shifts, all failing. The queen's bedchamber remained quiet and tense, the smell of sickness heavy. Zena was given a corner, a clay pot, and a warning: "You get one dish. If she rejects it, you're gone." Zena nodded. She laid her herbs carefully beside her, took out a blackened ladle she'd carried from home and set to work. She didn't rush. She started with bone broth, clear, slow-cooked, meant to strengthen the weak. Into it she added crushed ginger, forest garlic, and a piece of dried baobab fruit. Then came crushed corn, roasted gently until it smelled of memory. She stirred in coconut milk for smoothness and a pinch of pepper leaf for warmth. Finally, she crumbled in a piece of dried bitter leaf, a taste few would understand, but one the body remembered when healing was needed. As she stirred, the charm at her chest pulsed. The smoke curled around her in tight rings. The other cooks laughed, scoffing at her village stew. But Zena ignored them. She whispered into the pot as she stirred. "You are not just food. You are balm. You are song. You are hope remembered." When it was done, she poured the dish into a humble wooden bowl she had carried from home, one her mother once used for porridge. It was chipped but clean. The steward raised an eyebrow. "This is what you offer the queen?" Zena nodded. "It's not just for her belly. It's for her spirit." Ghania said nothing but led her up the spiral staircase, through thick curtains and past silent guards. Inside the chamber, the queen barely opened her eyes. The room was full of silence. One more failure and Zena would be sent away. She knelt beside the bed and held out the bowl. "I cooked this the way my mother cooked for me when I had nothing," she said softly. "Please taste it." The queen's eyes fluttered open. She sniffed the bowl, then, almost imperceptibly, her hand reached forward. She took one sip, then another, then a third. The entire room held its breath. For the first time in weeks, the queen swallowed and did not retch. Her breathing deepened. Her fingers unclenched. She leaned back into her pillows and whispered a word. "More." The king, alerted by the movement, burst in. His eyes widened at the sight of his wife sitting up, the bowl half empty in her lap. "Who cooked this?" he demanded. Ghania pointed. "The girl. From the village." The king turned to Zena, stunned. What do you want?" "Speak." "It shall be yours." Zena bowed her head. "I want only to be seen. To no longer be hidden in ashes." The king stepped closer. "Then rise, child of ash. From this day forward you shall not serve, but be served. Speak your name." She lifted her head. "My name is Zena." And in that moment something shifted, not just in the palace but in Zena's heart. Her food had spoken. And it had been heard. Smoke rose in thin, silver tendrils as the dawn broke over the rooftops of the palace town. The market square was still waking, its stone paths damp with dew and littered with the remnants of the previous day's trade. crushed tomatoes, onion skins, cracked eggshells and half-rotten plantains. The royal guards barely glanced at the girl weaving between stalls, a bundle tucked under her arm and soot on her cheeks. She looked like just another servant on an errand, too thin, too quiet to be of any concern. But Zena was not just any servant. Wrapped around her neck, hidden beneath the faded cloth of her shawl, pulsed the charm the ash woman had given her, warm and alive, like a heartbeat made of fire and memory. It was this charm that led her feet not to the baskets of fresh goods, but to the overlooked corners of the market, where food lay discarded, trampled, or forgotten. Here, Zena squatted beside a pile of bruised mangoes, gently turning them over. She picked the softest one, the one oozing slightly but still fragrant. Into her sack it went. A stand nearby was tossing out yam peels, their inner skins still tender and gold where the knife hadn't scraped too deep. She asked for them, and the vendor, laughing, waved her away with a shrug. She took them too. In an alley behind the spice trader's tent, a heap of split chili pods smoked in the sun. Zena picked through them, pulling out the freshest slivers. She reached deeper and found crushed cola nuts and dried lime peel, sharp, fragrant things others had cast aside. The charm grew warm against her chest. "What they waste," she whispered, "you will make golden." Her fingers were quick and careful. Her eyes saw value where others saw rot. She did not flinch when flies buzzed near, nor when passers-by mocked her. She moved with the steadiness of someone who had suffered, who knew how to survive with grace even in dirt and dust. Once her sack was full, she slipped back through the narrow streets to a small shed near the outer palace walls, a forgotten storage room she had discovered during her first days as a cook's apprentice. No one came here. It smelled of dried corn and dust, and sunlight filtered through a hole in the roof. It would do. She lit a small fire in the clay hearth, using coals she'd smuggled in a calabash. As the flames flickered to life, the charm warmed again, pulsing in rhythm with the sparks. It had done this before, each time she cooked something real, something from her heart. Today she wasn't cooking for the queen. She wasn't cooking for praise. She was cooking because something inside her had started to burn, not with rage but with a need to create, to reclaim. She would cook something from scraps that would be worthy of memory. She peeled the mango, careful not to waste even the skin. She boiled the yam peels in salted water until they softened, then fried them in a bit of oil she'd saved from the palace kitchen. The fried edges curled and crisped like golden feathers. She crushed the cola nut and sprinkled it with chili flakes and lime peel, stirring until it formed a bitter, tangy paste. Into the pot it went. Zena layered the flavors slowly, adding torn herbs she had gathered from a crack in the palace wall, stirring in coconut shavings she had rescued from the royal compost, and finally folding in the mango pulp until the mixture turned a deep, orange gold. As she stirred, she whispered to the fire, "This is for the forgotten ones. For those who eat last. For those who cook and are never tasted." The flame flared, then steadied. The charm burned hot against her chest, and the mixture in the pot began to glow, not brightly, not like a torch, but with a faint shimmer, like light reflecting off still water at sunset. She poured it into her clay bowl, the same one she had used to feed the queen. The bowl was old, its rim chipped, but it held the dish with dignity. Zena sat back and looked at her work. It wasn't a royal meal. It wasn't even a traditional one. But it was something else, something alive. She dipped a spoon and tasted. The flavor danced across her tongue, sweet, spicy, bitter, tangy, warm and cool all at once. Tasted like memory and fire. It tasted like everything she had been denied. She closed her eyes and for a moment she felt her mother's arms around her. The dish spoke not in words but in feelings. As night fell, Zena stayed in the shed with the bowl in her lap. She did not eat it. This was not food for the stomach. It was food for the soul, for the magic deep in the bones. She stood, lifted the bowl carefully and stepped out into the night. The palace shimmered with torches in the distance. She walked slowly toward it, not yet sure what she would do. But something told her that this dish, this glowing bowl of discarded beauty, would soon have its day. Not every fire burned to destroy. Some fires burned to reveal. And in Zena's hands that night, a new kind of flame had begun to rise. The palace kitchens were abuzz with frustration. Every royal cook had failed, their elaborate feast sent back untouched. The queen remained pale and silent, her appetite lost to whatever strange illness held her in its grip. Dishes from faraway lands, imported spices, roasted meats glazed in honey, fruits carved into birds, had all been rejected. The problem was not hunger, it was something deeper, something no one could name. In the midst of this culinary chaos stood Dama, the queen's personal tasting servant. His job was to ensure that nothing poisonous passed her lips. He had tasted hundreds of dishes in his lifetime, from street food during the king's visits to the villages to royal banquets prepared by chefs trained across the seas. But in the last few weeks, his task had become unbearable. Nothing worked. He had watched the queen waste away. Her once lively eyes were dimmed now, her lips dry. He saw the grief in the king's face as he sat by her side, helpless. This morning, a new dish had been delivered, not through the grand kitchen doors, but passed through a back corridor by a trembling hand. Dama had been called quietly, a messenger whispering that a strange but beautiful bowl had appeared in the corner shed, placed beside the hearth as if waiting to be found. Dama approached the clay bowl with curiosity. It looked simple at first glance, even crude, earthenware chipped at the rim. But what it held made him pause. The food glowed faintly, as if the ingredients had caught a sliver of sunlight and refused to let go. It wasn't flashy or perfumed. There were no gold flakes or flower petals, no royal signature carved into the surface. But the smell, oh the smell, it curled into his chest like warm hands on a winter morning. It reminded him of home, of safety, of something his grandmother once made in a hut far from this palace. He dipped a carved wooden spoon into the mixture. The texture was soft, yet held together. He brought the spoon to his lips and tasted. Dama froze. Then he closed his eyes. The flavor sang, not in notes but in stories. It told him of earth and sweat and laughter around a fire. It tasted of mango and ash, yam and memory, chili and something else, something unnameable but deep. Bitterness and sweetness danced together, balanced like old lovers who knew each other's steps. He opened his eyes slowly. He was no longer in the kitchen. He was back in his village, standing beside his mother as she cooked over a clay stove, teaching him the names of herbs. He was 9 again. Innocent. A voice behind him broke the moment. "What is it?" asked one of the junior chefs, watching with suspicion. "Who brought it?" Dama turned to them and said softly, "No one important." He picked up the bowl and walked past them without another word. He did not take it through the grand hall. He did not announce it to the court. He crept through the side passage used by healers and nurses, holding the bowl close to his chest as if it might vanish. When he entered the queen's chamber, it was silent but heavy with worry. The king sat nearby, face in hands. The queen lay propped up on cushions, eyes half-lidded, lips cracked. A maid dabbed her forehead with a cool cloth. "I have something," Dama said quietly. The king looked up. "Another dish? Haven't we tried enough?" "This is not from the royal kitchens," Dama said. "It came from the ashes." That strange phrase made both the maid and the king pause. Dama knelt beside the queen. He took a small spoonful and offered it to her lips. At first she didn't move. Then, barely, she opened her mouth and tasted. The effect was immediate. Her lips twitched. Her brows furrowed. And then, her eyes opened wider. She reached for another bite. The king sat forward, stunned. "What is that?" Dama didn't answer. He was too focused on the queen, who now took the spoon herself and fed slowly, deliberately. Her fingers trembled, but there was a spark in her movements that had been absent for weeks. Color returned to her cheeks with every bite. A single tear slipped down her face. She whispered hoarsely, "This reminds me of my mother." The king looked at Dama. "Who made it?" Dama hesitated. He knew the truth would sound strange. But finally he said, "A girl from the servant quarters. One who eats what others throw away." The king's brow furrowed. "Bring her to me." Dama nodded, but inside he wasn't sure if the world was ready for Zena. All he knew was that something had shifted. Something small, born in ash and scraps, had stirred the queen back to life. And the palace would never taste the same again. The queen had not eaten a full meal in over 2 moons. Her body had grown frail, her skin pale, her voice nearly silenced. But on that afternoon, after spoonful of Zena's strange, glowing dish, something deep within her stirred. It wasn't just the nourishment, it was something older, something sacred that danced through her veins and warmed the cold places in her bones. The room stood in stunned silence as the queen sat upright on her own for the first time in weeks. She set the spoon down gently, her fingers no longer trembling. She closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. The scent of the dish still lingered, rich, smoky, earthen, and alive. "I want to meet her," the queen said, her voice hoarse but certain. "The one who made this." The king, startled and overjoyed, leaned forward. "Of course, my love." Immediately. Dama, still kneeling beside the bed, bowed and said, "I will find her." But outside the palace, Zena was already walking away. She had slipped out as quietly as she had come, her heart pounding not with fear, but wonder. She hadn't expected them to let her in, let alone to serve the queen directly. She hadn't wanted fame. She only wanted to share what was inside her. The food, the magic, the warmth she remembered from her mother's own clay pots. She didn't see the figure watching her from behind a merchant's stall. It was her stepmother. Dressed in rich cloth she had no right to wear, her stepmother had followed Zena from the village after noticing her sneak out with a basket of peels and scraps earlier that morning. Suspicious of her behavior, she trailed her through the market and eventually to the edge of the palace. And now, she had seen the queen's servant taste her food. She had seen the excitement. She had heard whispers of healing. Ambition swelled like poison in her veins. Before Zena could vanish, her stepmother stormed into the palace's rear gate, shouting, "It was me. I'm the cook who saved the queen." The guards looked confused, but the king, desperate to fulfill the queen's wish, ordered her to be brought in. And so the stepmother found herself standing in the royal chamber, bowing dramatically. "I am called Nori, wife to a humble farmer," she said with a syrupy voice. "I've long studied herbs and old ways. I prepared the dish myself with my own hands and sent it with my daughter. Shy girl, doesn't speak much. But the gift, the art, is mine." Dama's brow furrowed. Something was off. The woman's hands were too smooth, her speech too rehearsed. But he remained quiet for now. The queen studied her carefully. "And what is in the dish?" she asked. Nori hesitated just for a second. Then she smiled. "Roots, yam skin, tamarind ash, and a secret mix of dried herbs. From my grandmother's scrolls." The queen's eyes narrowed. "What was the last ingredient?" "Roasted mango peel," Nori lied confidently. Dama stiffened. That wasn't right. The real ingredient, Zena's creation, had used fermented lemon rind and fire-cured okra seeds. Mango peel would have made the dish bitter. He had tasted it enough to know. The queen too noticed the inconsistency. Just then the palace gates buzzed again. Another girl had arrived, quiet, barefoot, and wrapped in a smoke-scented shawl. Zena had returned. Not because she wanted fame, but because something told her she had left something behind. Not a bowl, not a spoon, but something invisible. A part of her. A thread she needed to follow. She was brought in and stood in silence, unsure what to say. Nori gasped. "That's the girl I was telling you about. My daughter. So shy. You see, I taught her everything." But Zena didn't nod. She stepped forward and said, "That woman is not my mother. My mother died years ago. That one married my father after and fed me from the dustbin. I cooked that dish. I did it with what others threw away. I stirred it with ash and fire and a charm from the smoke." The queen tilted her head. "A charm?" Zena opened her shawl and pulled out the tiny amulet, still warm, faintly glowing. "An old woman gave it to me. She said, 'What they waste you will make golden.' And I believed her." The room fell silent. The king turned to Nori. "Is this true?" "Aye, she's lying," Nori shouted. "Ungrateful child. You think she has magic in her hands? She doesn't even know how to hold a knife." But Dama stepped forward now. "I watched her bring the bowl in. I tasted it. I saw her slip away in silence. I believe her." The queen, still resting but stronger by the moment, looked into Zena's eyes. "You made this from what others threw away?" Zena nodded. "Yes, your majesty. Because it's how I lived." The queen smiled faintly. "Then you've done more than heal me. You've reminded me of something our palace forgot, the power of humble things." The king turned to Nori. "You came here with lies in your mouth. Leave this palace now. And know this, your cruelty will follow you." Nori screamed and had to be dragged out by guards, her fine robes tearing as she went. As for Zena, she was offered a place in the palace kitchens not just as a cook, but as a master of a new craft, fireborn food, the kind that healed not just the body but memory itself. That night, the queen finished every drop of the meal. And when Zena left the chamber, she did not walk like a girl who had eaten from the dustbin. She walked like a woman who had fed a kingdom. The days following Zena's arrival in the palace were filled with tension, whispers, and wonder. No one could deny the magic that had surged through the queen the moment she tasted Zena's food. The queen had regained her strength so rapidly that it was nothing short of miraculous. Yet the question remained, how had a simple village girl created such a powerful dish? The queen was not one to simply accept an answer at face value. She had learned that much in her years of rule. And so, as Zena's presence in the royal kitchens became more frequent, the queen ordered that the girl be brought before the entire court, to witness firsthand the power she wielded. The grand hall was a spectacle of royal indulgence. Golden banners hung from the high ceiling, attendants and nobles gathered in the polished marble space, and the air was thick with expectation. In the center, a long table had been set for Zena's demonstration. The queen had insisted that she prepare a dish as she had done before, but this time under her watchful eye and the scrutinizing gaze of the court. Zena stood before the table, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she had learned in the days since her arrival. She had lived through so much, the cruelty of her stepmother, the hunger, the ashes of her solitude, and yet she had also lived through something more, the slow, steady strength that had come from it. The queen, still recovering from the illness, watched from her golden seat, her eyes heavy with both curiosity and command. Zena had been given all the ingredients she required, yet she found herself hesitating. The palace kitchens were full of rare spices and exotic fruits, but Zena knew that wasn't where the magic lay. The magic wasn't in the food, it was in the hands that prepared it. Zena closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, the old pain of hunger, of scraping together something from nothing. It was a pain she had learned to live with, to turn into something beautiful. She reached into the basket beside her, taking the leftover root vegetables, the ones no other cook would touch, the ones discarded in the corners of the kitchen. There was no waste here, not anymore. As she worked, the court watched in stunned silence. Zena's movements were deliberate but gentle. No frantic stirring, no unnecessary flourishes. She scraped the vegetables carefully, cutting away the blemishes, but never discarding the imperfect parts. She used the scraps, the parts that others thought unworthy, and made them into something whole. She mixed them with a handful of dried herbs, their scent warm and earthy in the air. Her hands were steady as she began to stir the mixture, her fingers moving in slow, rhythmic motions, as if the dish were an extension of herself. A faint glow began to rise from the pot, casting an eerie but beautiful light across her face. The court gasped. The queen, watching with intensity, leaned forward. Her eyes widened as the glow became brighter, more pronounced. It wasn't just the ingredients. It was something deeper, something that surged from within Zena herself. The glow grew brighter still, until the entire room seemed bathed in a soft, golden light. The dish simmered, and Zena's hands moved faster now, her fingers dancing in the air as she whispered words beneath her breath, words no one could understand, yet everyone felt. The court remained silent, mesmerized by the transformation taking place before their eyes. Zena looked up, her face calm but filled with something powerful. She raised the dish in front of the queen, who extended her hand without hesitation. The moment the queen touched the bowl, a shiver ran through the air, like an electric pulse. The queen took a spoonful. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, there was nothing but the stillness of the room. The nobles, the servants, the courtiers, they waited. Then the queen opened her eyes. Tears welled in her eyes, glistening like the morning dew. She smiled softly, a look of awe in her gaze. "I feel it," she whispered. "I feel the magic, not in the food but in you." Zena lowered her gaze. "It is not the food, your majesty," she said softly, her voice barely audible to the room. "It is the hands that make it." The queen nodded, as if understanding something that had eluded her before. "You have created something more than just a meal," she said. "You've created a healing that comes from suffering, from kindness, and from those who have learned to live in the shadows of others." Zena's hands shook, but not from fear. She felt the weight of the truth in her chest. The magic doesn't come from what is discarded. It comes from what is given even when there is nothing left to give. It comes from the hunger, the love, and the desire to feed. The queen's gaze softened and she reached out, taking Zena's hand in hers. "You have a gift, girl. A gift that is older than the kingdoms we rule. What is it that you seek in return for this?" Zena hesitated. She had never thought about rewards, never considered what she might ask for in return. Her life had been filled with taking what was given to her, never offering more than what was expected. But now, standing before the queen and the entire court, she realized she could ask for something more, for herself, for those who had been overlooked, for those who had known hunger. "I seek nothing for myself, your majesty," she said, her voice steady now. "But I ask that you remember what I have made here. I ask that you feed the people not just with food but with kindness. Do not waste what is given to you. Do not throw away what others need. In every scrap there is something to be shared." The queen was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Zena's face as if seeing her for the first time. Then she nodded slowly. "You have wisdom beyond your years," she said quietly. "We will remember. We will share." The room was still for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Then the courtiers began to murmur, some in approval, others in disbelief. But it was the queen's voice that rose above the rest. "This girl," she said, standing tall and addressing the court, "has reminded me of something we've forgotten. That the most powerful magic does not come from gold or jewels, but from the hearts of those who have nothing to give but themselves. Zena, from this day forth, you will not only be a cook but a royal advisor. You will teach us the ways of humility and grace." Zena looked at the queen, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had never imagined this life for herself. She had never dreamed of standing in the court of a queen, let alone advising her. But in this moment she realized she had already been given everything she had ever needed. The truth had been in the bowl all along. It was not magic in the food but in the hands that prepared it. Hands that had known hardship, hands that had known love, and hands that had learned to create beauty from suffering. As the courtiers clapped and murmured their approval, Zena stood quietly, her heart full, knowing that her journey had only just begun. The sun hung low over the palace, casting long shadows through the grand halls. The court had gathered in full force, a murmur of anticipation rippling through the crowd. Zena stood at the front, her head held high, as the queen prepared to reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. The stepmother, once so proud and confident in her deceit, stood with her back straight and her chin lifted high. She had come to the palace, convinced that she could take the glory of Zena's success for herself. She had followed Zena into the kitchens, masquerading as the rightful cook, and had attempted to claim the credit for the healing dish that had saved the queen. But now, in the wake of Zena's true demonstration, the stepmother's charade had been exposed. Zena could feel the heat in her chest, a fire born of both anger and liberation. She had spent so many years in silence, enduring the harsh treatment of a woman who had never seen her as anything more than a servant. The injustice she had suffered now stood before her, the woman who had made her life a nightmare. The queen, her regal presence towering over the room, raised her hand to silence the court. Her voice, when it came, was sharp and commanding. "Let it be known," the queen said, her gaze locked on the stepmother, "that Zena, the girl from the village, is the true creator of the dish that healed me. She has given us not just food but magic. A magic born of kindness, sacrifice and suffering. And in this truth, we shall expose the lies that have poisoned this palace." The stepmother's eyes widened, the color draining from her face as the weight of the queen's words sank in. She had never imagined that her treachery would be revealed in such a public way. She had come to the palace with confidence, believing she could manipulate the court and claim the honor for herself. But now she stood before them a fool. "You," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury as she turned to Zena. "You worthless little wretch. Do you think I would let you take everything from me? I made you what you are. I fed you, clothed you, and you fed me scraps." Zena interjected calmly, her voice steady despite the years of bitterness that had built up inside her. "You fed me the very things you now seek to steal from me. You fed me cold, rotting food and treated me as less than nothing. But I am not your servant any longer. I am not your victim." The stepmother recoiled as if slapped, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. She had expected Zena to cower, to remain meek and obedient. But Zena had risen above her cruelty, had taken the scraps she had been given and transformed them into something beautiful. The court was silent now, the nobles exchanging uneasy glances. They had seen the stepmother's cruelty firsthand, had heard the rumors and whispers, but hearing Zena speak her truth so boldly made them realize just how far the woman had gone to break her spirit. Zena's eyes locked onto the queen's. "I ask that you punish her not with the death she once wished for me, but with the same punishment she gave me every day of my life." The queen's lips twitched with a knowing smile. "So it shall be," she declared. "The stepmother will taste what she so often gave you. She will eat the scraps she once fed you. She will learn what it is like to suffer for her cruelty." A murmur ran through the court, and the stepmother's face twisted in disbelief. "No, no, this is absurd," she cried. "I am the one who deserves the honor, the glory. You cannot." "You have no place here," the queen interrupted coldly, her eyes narrowing. "You will be cast from the palace and from the village. Your name will be erased from the records and you will live as you have made others live. Alone, abandoned and cast aside." The stepmother staggered backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps as if the very air had been knocked from her. "No. I demand to be treated with respect," she shrieked, but her words fell on deaf ears. The queen motioned to the guards, who stepped forward and grabbed the stepmother by the arms. She struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. Her reign of terror was over. With deliberate slowness, the court servants brought forward a large bowl, filled with cold, unappetizing scraps, leftovers from the kitchens, rotting vegetables and fish bones. The very same that Zena had once been forced to eat, day after day. The scent was putrid, the sight revolting, yet it was the stepmother's fate now. She would be forced to eat it all. No. No, I won't, the stepmother cried, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. She tried to push the bowl away, but the guards held her in place. You will, Zena said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of suffering. You will eat what you gave me. You will know what it feels like to be discarded, to be nothing. And then, maybe, you will understand what it truly means to be human. The queen nodded in agreement. It is a fitting punishment. Let her taste what she has served. The stepmother's hands shook as she reached for the spoon, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. She took a bite, her face contorting as the rancid taste hit her tongue. It was worse than anything she had ever imagined. The coldness, the bitterness, the humiliation of being forced to consume what she had once thought so beneath her. But it was nothing compared to what Zena had endured. The court watched in silence, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and awe. Some of the nobles looked away, unable to stomach the sight. Others seemed to take pleasure in the stepmother's downfall, in the humbling of a woman who had once held so much power over them all. The stepmother gagged, her face pale as she swallowed the vile food. You cannot do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I am your mother. I am the one who... No, Zena interrupted once more. You are not my mother. You were never my mother. And now you will learn the true meaning of what it is to care for someone else. With a final, guttural sob, the stepmother was dragged from the palace, her fate sealed. She was banished from the village, forced to wander in disgrace, her name forever tarnished by her cruelty. Zena stood tall as the crowd parted before her, their gazes filled with respect and admiration. She had faced the darkness of her past, and in doing so she had reclaimed her future. The stepmother's fall was the last chapter of a painful story, but it marked the beginning of a new one, a story of redemption, of kindness, and of strength. And in that moment, Zena realized that she had not only overcome the suffering that had once defined her, she had transcended it. She had become something more, something powerful. The girl who had once been a servant was now a queen in her own right, her heart filled with the light of her own strength. As the queen smiled at her, Zena knew that her journey had only just begun. And this time it was her turn to rise. Zena stood in the center of the palace kitchen, her heart racing. The aroma of freshly baked bread and stews filled the air, mingling with the sharp scent of herbs. The queen had just offered her a place in the royal kitchens, a position of honor and privilege. The thought of working in such a grand setting, with ingredients at her disposal and the opportunity to create magnificent meals, was a dream come true for many. But Zena had something different in mind. She was no longer the girl who had been forced to cook for a cruel stepmother, scraping together meals from scraps. She was no longer the servant, the one who had been treated as less than human. Now she was a woman with a purpose, and her purpose was to help those who had suffered as she once had. The palace kitchens were a far cry from the small, cramped hut where Zena had spent her childhood. Here, polished countertops gleamed, and the pots and pans were made of shining metal. The staff moved with practiced grace, their hands steady as they prepared elaborate meals for the court. But despite the opulence, Zena felt the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders. The memory of hunger, of deprivation, was still fresh in her mind, and it drove her every day. As she stood there, a woman of newfound strength, she looked around the kitchen, taking in the busy atmosphere. The sounds of chopping knives, sizzling pans, and low murmurs of conversation filled the air. But Zena's thoughts were elsewhere. She was already imagining what she could do with this opportunity, what she could create not just for the royal court, but for the children and orphans who had known the same suffering she had. The queen had given her a gift, an opportunity to be part of something greater. But Zena knew that the true gift lay in what she could give to others. She wanted the royal kitchen to be a place where not just the wealthy and privileged could enjoy fine meals, but where orphan children, those who had known hunger and pain, could find solace and hope. After a long day of cooking and preparation, Zena spoke with the queen in private. The regal woman, who had once been so ill and frail, now radiated with health, her face shining with vitality. Zena had earned the queen's respect not just through her cooking, but through her bravery and kindness. Your Majesty, Zena began, her voice steady but filled with passion, I am deeply grateful for the position you have offered me. But I ask for one favor, if you would permit it. The queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What is it you desire, Zena? The queen asked, her voice calm and attentive. I wish to open the royal kitchen to those who have been abandoned, those who have known hunger and pain. I want to teach them how to cook, how to use food as a means of healing and survival. I want the kitchen to be a sanctuary for the orphan children in this kingdom, a place where they can learn not just the art of cooking but the art of hope. The queen regarded her for a long moment, her eyes thoughtful. The idea was unconventional, to say the least. The royal kitchens were meant for the elite, for those who could afford such luxury. But there was something in Zena's words that struck a chord within her. "You have a rare heart, Zena," the queen said, her voice soft but firm. "Your compassion is evident, and I can see that you have a gift for more than just cooking. Very well, you may open the royal kitchen to those you see fit. But you must also teach them the values of hard work, dedication, and discipline. The palace is not a place for idleness or carelessness." Zena's heart swelled with gratitude. She bowed deeply to the queen, her mind already racing with possibilities. She would create something beautiful, something that would change the lives of those who came through the doors of the royal kitchen. As the days passed, Zena worked tirelessly to transform the royal kitchen. She began to invite orphan children and young people from the surrounding villages, those who had lost their parents to war, disease, or misfortune. She welcomed them with open arms, offering them the opportunity to learn the craft of cooking. At first, the children were hesitant, unsure of what to expect. Many of them had never stepped foot in such a grand kitchen before, and the polished floors and gleaming utensils were intimidating. But Zena was patient with them. She took the time to show them how to prepare simple dishes, to teach them the importance of each ingredient, and to help them understand that cooking was not just about following a recipe, it was about infusing love and care into every meal. Zena encouraged them to experiment with their own ideas, to mix flavors, to try new techniques. She wanted them to see that cooking was not just a means of survival, it was an art form, a way to express their emotions and experiences. She shared stories of her own childhood, of the scraps she had been forced to eat, and how she had used food as a way to survive. And as she shared these stories, the children began to open up, sharing their own experiences of loss and hardship. Slowly but surely the kitchen began to change. What had once been a place for the privileged and elite became a space of community and healing. The children learned not just to cook but to care for one another. They learned to be kind, to support each other, and to recognize the strength in their shared experiences. The royal court soon took notice of the transformation that was taking place. The once empty kitchen now bustled with activity, the laughter of children echoing off the stone walls. The nobles, who had once looked down upon the orphan children, began to see them in a new light. They marveled at the meals that were being prepared, the flavors that danced on their tongues, and the beauty of the food that Zena had taught the children to create. In time, the royal kitchen became a symbol of hope for the kingdom. It was no longer just a place for food, it was a place where dreams were made, where those who had once been forgotten were given a chance to thrive. And at the center of it all stood Zena, the girl who had once known only hunger and pain, now a beacon of light for those who needed it most. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Zena watched as the orphan children grew stronger, their skills honed and their spirits lifted. She knew that the work she had started would continue long after she had gone, a legacy of love, healing, and transformation. And as she looked out over the kitchen, her heart filled with pride. She had turned a place of luxury into a sanctuary, a place where children could learn not just to cook, but to rebuild their lives. She had found her true purpose, and it was here, in the warmth of the royal kitchen, surrounded by those who had once been forgotten but were now cherished. Zena's heart swelled with gratitude for the journey she had taken. From the ashes of her past, she had risen, and now, with each meal she prepared, she was feeding not just bodies but souls. The royal kitchen had become a place where magic and hope lived side by side, and Zena knew, deep in her heart, that she had found her true calling. Years had passed since Zena first stepped into the royal kitchen, the small, humble girl with nothing but a broken past and an unyielding spirit. Now, she stood in the same grand hall, her heart full as she prepared for a feast like no other. The long tables were lined with golden platters, filled to the brim with dishes that had once been nothing more than scraps, fragments of leftovers and castaway ingredients. Yet today, these humble foods were about to become symbols of something much greater. The royal kitchen, once a space for privilege and decadence, had transformed into a sanctuary for those who had known hunger, loss, and hardship. Over the years, Zena had turned the kitchen into a place of learning, where orphan children and forgotten souls had found not just nourishment but purpose. And now she wanted to honor them, the children who had once sat in the ashes of their lives and had risen with her. The feast had been planned for weeks, but the meaning behind it was even older. It was a celebration of all those who had been left behind, who had once been discarded like scraps, only to be transformed into something extraordinary. Zena smiled as she looked around the grand hall, the echoes of voices, laughter and excitement filling the air. The royal court, the nobles and the once-forgotten villagers had gathered in this very space. They were all here to witness what had become of the girl who had turned dustbin food into royal magic. Zena's hands moved skillfully, placing the final touches on each dish. The scraps she had once been forced to eat were now transformed into delicate meals, each dish a work of art. The simplicity of the ingredients had never been a reflection of their worth, but of the love and care she had poured into every meal. And now, these same humble dishes were symbols of her journey, her transformation from a servant girl to the woman who had changed an entire kingdom's relationship with food. As the guests began to take their seats, Zena's eyes caught the faces of those she had helped along the way, the children who had once been hungry and scared, their eyes filled with uncertainty. But now their eyes were bright with pride. They had learned the art of cooking, but more than that, they had learned the value of community and healing. They were no longer orphans. They were a family, bound together by the meals they had shared, the lessons they had learned, and the love that had been kindled between them. The feast began, and with each bite, the guests marveled at the flavors, the textures, and the richness of the food. They whispered to one another, their voices filled with awe as they tasted dishes made from ingredients that would have once been discarded. A humble stew of root vegetables, once considered worthless, now had a depth of flavor that sent ripples of pleasure through the guests. The bread, made from leftover grains, was light and airy, its golden crust a symbol of resilience. Each dish told a story, the story of transformation, of finding beauty in the overlooked, and of the magic that lay hidden in the most unlikely of places. But it was not just the food that captured their attention. It was the story behind it. The people spoke in hushed tones, recounting the tale of the girl who had been forced to eat from the dustbin, the girl who had turned what others saw as garbage into something sacred. They spoke of Zena with reverence, their voices full of admiration for the woman who had given everything to help those who had nothing. As the evening wore on, Zena stood at the head of the table, her heart swelling with pride. The feast was not just a celebration of food, it was a celebration of everything that had been reborn in this kitchen. It was a testament to the power of love, of compassion, and of the belief that no one was ever truly forgotten. The last course was served, sweet fruits and pastries made from the finest ingredients the kingdom had to offer. But as they were served, the guests knew that the true sweetness of the meal lay not in the ingredients, but in the journey that had brought them here. Zena had taken the scraps, the broken pieces, and had turned them into something beautiful. She had turned hunger into abundance, pain into joy, and a simple meal into a symbol of hope. As the guests rose to toast her, Zena's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. She had created a legacy, a feast that would be remembered for generations. The once forgotten had found their place at the table, and they would never again be cast aside. The whispers that echoed through the halls were not of the girl who had once been cast aside, but of the woman who had turned the ashes into something divine. Zena, the girl who had turned dustbin food into royal magic, had become a symbol of hope and transformation for all who had once been left behind. And as the night drew to a close, Zena knew that the true feast was not just in the food they had eaten, but in the lives they had touched. The feast for the forgotten had become a feast for the soul, and it would live on in the hearts of all those who had tasted its magic.